This video is about the female reproductive system and fertilisation. So we need to be able to know about the various stages that occur in the ovary during the menstrual cycle. We need to know about the hormones secreted by the follicle, and we need to know where fertilisation takes place within the female's reproductive tract. This is a side view diagram of the female reproductive system. The parts labelled in blue are the ones that we need to know about. You can see we've got the oviduct and the ovary. Ovary is where eggs are produced and released from. The oviduct transports the eggs from the ovary to the uterus. The uterus is where the embryo will implant and develop. And the lining of the uterus is called the endometrium. The cervix is the muscular entrance to the uterus. And the vagina or birth canal is where the semen is deposited, and it's also where the baby is born through. And this diagram shows the front view of the female reproductive system with all those parts labelled. The ovaries contain immature ova in various stages of development. Each ovum is surrounded by a follicle that protects the developing ovum and secretes hormones. Now, ova is the plural, it means more than one, and ovum is the singular and it means just one. Like the testes, the ovaries have two functions. One is the production of the gametes, the ova, and the second one is the production of the female sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone. So when a female is born, she contains on average 300,000 ova in each ovary. Right? These are immature follicles. The ova have not developed properly yet. This number reduces at an increasing rate until she reaches the menopause in late 40s to 50s, and this is when ovulation stops. When a female begins ovulating at puberty, on average, a follicle matures and an ovum develops approximately every 28 days, although this can vary. It can be more, it can be less. Ovulation is the word that describes the process whereby an ovum is released from the ovary. So each ovum is surrounded by a protective follicle, which in the first half of the menstrual cycle secretes the hormone estrogen. When the mature ovum is released from the ovary, this is known as ovulation. Right? The mature follicle bursts or ruptures, releasing the ovum. The ovum then passes down into the oviduct, where it may be fertilised if sperm are present. After ovulation, the remains of the empty follicle develop into a corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum secretes the other female sex hormone, progesterone. This diagram shows all the stages that the follicle will pass through during one menstrual cycle. You would not see all of these stages occurring in the ovary at one time. Okay, it's a cycle that the ovary passes through every month. So we start off with several developing follicles, each containing an immature ovum. After about 7 days or so, one of these follicles will become the dominant one and the rest will just disintegrate. So the dominant follicle becomes a mature follicle. It contains the ovum and it also secretes the hormone estrogen. Round about midway through the cycle, the mature follicle bursts and that releases the ovum. This is called ovulation. The remains of the follicle become the corpus luteum, which secretes the hormone progesterone. Eventually, the corpus luteum degenerates, it just sort of shrivels up, stops secreting progesterone, and then the cycle starts all over again with more developing follicles. This microscope picture shows the remains of the collapsed follicle. So you can see in the middle, where the follicle has ruptured, there is actually a blood clot. So that's where the egg would have been. And then round about, these are the cells that have become the luteal cells that produce the progesterone. So here's a summary. So a hormone triggers the growth of a follicle in the ovary. This follicle becomes a mature follicle. About midway through the cycle, the mature follicle bursts, releasing the ovum. This is called ovulation. The remains of the follicle become a corpus luteum that secretes progesterone. If fertilisation does not occur, the corpus luteum will degenerate or break down. And then a few days later, the cycle will begin again with the development of more follicles. After ovulation, there are two possible fates of an ovum. One is that it becomes fertilised and fuses with a sperm and forms a zygote. The second is that if it is not fertilised, it is removed from the body along with the endometrium during menstruation. Eggs will only be receptive to sperm for around 24 hours after ovulation. When an ovum meets a sperm in the oviduct, their nuclei fuse, and this forms a cell called a zygote. So this shows the process of fertilisation. You don't need to know this much detail, okay? But generally speaking, what happens is the ovum will be surrounded by several sperm. The sperm will release the enzymes contained within their acrosomes to digest through the jelly coat surrounding the egg. The sperm nucleus only will enter the egg cytoplasm, and the sperm nucleus will fuse with the egg nucleus to form the zygote. So you have the haploid sperm nucleus with the haploid egg nucleus. When they fuse, you get a diploid zygote. Following the formation of a zygote, it will divide repeatedly to form a ball of identical cells that makes up an embryo. The embryo will travel down the oviduct and will eventually implant itself in the endometrium, which is the thickened lining of the uterus. Once it has successfully implanted itself in the endometrium, the embryo will continue to divide and then will eventually become a fetus. So this summarises the process. So we have a haploid egg cell with a haploid sperm cell. Their nuclei fuse at fertilisation to form a diploid zygote, and that diploid zygote will divide by mitosis and continually divide, and you will have an embryo made up of multiple diploid cells. So fertilisation will take place in the very top part of the oviduct. And then the zygote will divide and divide and divide, doubling the number of cells with each division until it implants in the uterus around 7 to 10 days after fertilisation. An ovum will only be viable for fertilisation for a short time, around 24 hours. If fertilisation doesn't take place within that time, then the hormones that are sustaining the endometrium, the lining of the uterus, will stop being produced. And then menstruation will take place. This is the shedding of the endometrium, commonly known as a period. So the endometrium will come away and the unfertilised ovum will also come away, and they will pass out through the cervix and out through the vagina.